How do you get the most out of your ranch horse?
You're refining those to where he's pretty 100% spot on, consistent with it. You could put those reins together, the two sets of reins, the Hackamore rein and the bridle rein, to where both of them pick up on the horse at the same time. And then over the course of time, you'd eventually drop that Hackamore rein and exclusively operating with the bridle reins. But you'd always have that opportunity if the work got real fast again and you needed to be really accurate, that you could pick that Hackamore rein up and say, hey, remember how this was? And the horse would be theoretically feeling back to you and go, oh yeah, I got this.
Turns out a big part of it is having a connection with your horse.
Being a leader of a horse on the end of a lead rope means you are supposed to move the horse's feet. The horse is not supposed to move your feet. Be able to have that horse go around you in a circle and be truly bent in the direction of the circle. I tell folks all the time that horse should be shaped like a banana going around your circle, because people can relate to that. Have that horse be mentally connected to you, even if you got 6 or 8 feet away and you weren't pulling on the lead rope. Have his mind keep track of you.
All that and more on this episode 508 of the Working Cows podcast, brought to you by Indraland Angus Ranch, Create Coaches, Gray's Magazine, and the South Dakota Grassland Coalition.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Hi, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast. Very excited to be joined today by Kip Fladland. Kip is, of course, a horse trainer from Montana, and he is out there helping people get more out of their ranch horses. And he's learned from the likes of Buck Brannaman and Ray Hunt and others over the years, and kind of in that vein. And what I wanted to talk to him about is, how do we go about getting the most out of our ranch horse? Do we have to make spade bit horses out of every horse that we have? And what do we do to help them progress and be more helpful, useful, and just more fun partners in our day-to-day ranch work? So here is my conversation with Kip Fladland. Kip, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Clay. Appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Yeah, always been intrigued by the idea of a spade bit horse, or maybe not always, but the last 5 years or so, 6, 7 years or so, I've been intrigued by that idea. And so I guess I want to talk just a little bit about the process of developing a horse that is useful with a spade bit, and then we'll take it a little different direction from there. But
Sure.
Talk me through that process and kind of the benefits of it and what the finished product looks like.
Well, certainly in this style of horsemanship, in a perfect world, you'd be starting your young horses the spring or summer of their 2-year-old year. Now, if that horse is really small physically or something like that, there's always that kind of caveat. But most of the time, you're going to start them the spring of their 2-year-old year. In this day and age, we ride them in a snaffle bit first, typically, and then move to the Hackamore. But you're going to ride that horse in a snaffle bit for probably a year or two at least. And there's quite a laundry list of different movements and exercises and jobs that horse should get good at prior to moving to the Hackamore. And in this fashion, the Hackamore is referred to as a California-style Hackamore, which is a rawhide noseband, which is called a bozal, in addition to what's called the leather hanger, which a lot of people would refer to as a headstall. And then traditionally, it certainly has a hair rope McCarty tied to it. Now, there's a bazillion ways to tie your hair rope on that Hackamore, but that's beside the point. But that Hackamore should fit around that horse's muzzle, much like your hat fits on your head, with no air gaps around the sides of it or whatever. And then, like I say, in a perfect world, again, you're going to ride that horse from the fall of his 3-year-old year, let's say, till the fall of his 4-year-old year. And then you're going to move on into what's called the 2-rein. I should say in the Hackamore stage, you're not particularly introducing any new movements per se. You're just refining the movements that horse already knows. Most folks think in the Western world, the holy grail of movements, of course, is a flying lead change. So in the snaffle bit, your horse doesn't have to be perfect at flying lead changes, but he should certainly have been exposed to it. But by the time you're in the hackamore, you're refining those flying changes to where he's pretty 100% spot on, consistent with it. Then when you go to the two rein, that's the first time you'd probably be riding that horse exclusively in one hand. Now, don't get me wrong, you've been riding him in one hand in the snaffle bit and the hackamore all the while because you're probably roping cattle, roping horses, riding around the flag, whatever it might be. But the reins are held exclusively in one hand. We have a pencil-style hackamore underneath a California-style bridle that has reins and romal on it, typically made of rawhide or leather. The advantage of that is if work got really fast, you could drop those bridle reins over your saddle horn and exclusively use the hackamore rein, which the horse should be fluent and be aware of as far as maneuvering himself during your job. But when work is really slow, or maybe you're out just trailing some cows or just on a trail ride or whatever like that, you could put those reins together, the two sets of reins, the hackamore rein and the bridle rein, to where both of them pick up on the horse at the same time. And then over the course of time, you'd eventually drop that hackamore rein and exclusively operating with the bridle reins. But you'd always have that opportunity if the work got real fast again and you needed to be really accurate, that you could pick that hackamore rein up and say, hey, remember how this was? And the horse would be theoretically feeling back to you and go, oh yeah, I got this. Turn around over his hocks, do a slide and stop, whatever it might be. And then you're going to ride that horse probably a year, maybe even 2 years in a two rein. Because quite honestly, the two rein is a very attractive piece of gear. You probably got a decorative pencil Bozell, a really nice, what's called a pencil McCarty tied to that. Then you got probably a silver mounted bridle, with a silver mounted headstall, reins and romal made out of rawhide typically, so it's a pretty good looking outfit. So there's no rush getting out of that, let's say. But by the fall of their 6-year-old year, their 7-year-old year, you're what's called straight up in the bridle. You take that pencil hackamore out from underneath the bridle and put on what's called the bosalita. The bosalita is strictly to honor the bridle horse tradition and to tell an onlooker that horse has achieved a level of education that is superior. Okay, it serves no physical purpose other than a mark of respect and education level. You got a get down rope tied around his neck, or maybe even tied to the base of that bosalita, and then you're just riding exclusively with bridle reins and a California style bridle bit. So, and we call that a finished horse, but quite honestly, they're never really finished because you can get so refined with a lot of different movements that you could ride a bridle horse for 4 or 5 years and get him better that entire time. So, but that's
Right.
kind of the hierarchy or the chronological order of things, and kind of that I learned and have followed and that kind of stuff. So
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Indraland Angus Ranch. In 3 separate recent conversations with seed stock producers who made appearances on the Working Cows podcast, they all remarked that they had an immense amount of respect for Roger and Betsy Indraland at Indraland Angus because of the pressure they put on their cows to work and perform without assistance. If you want bulls that are durable and fertile, you can get your hands on them May 29th, 2026 in person near Big Timber, Montana, or online. Yes, 40 of these coming 2-year-old bulls that have been developed on grass will sell May 29th, 2026. For more information, check out indralandranch.com. Could you give me some examples of the movements that you're thinking about? I mean, you mentioned one, the flying lead change, but other movements that you're thinking about in the snaffle bit process?
Well, typically, like I said, there's a little bit of a laundry list. And I'm not really sure where we came up with the word laundry list because, you could use a grocery list or, a maintenance list or whatever. But anyway, there's a list of movements that you got to know. They got to be able to walk, trot, and lope accurately on a loose rein and what we call a soft feel or on the bit, consequently in a frame. Someday you would call that collection. But at this stage, the snaffle bit stage, we just call it on the bit, so to speak. They're, they're all the gentling things, they're good to lead, they're good to tie, they're good to saddle, they're good to shoe, they're good to catch, they're good to trailer. All that kind of stuff has been done already, and they are good at all of that. They can stop hard, they can stop soft, they can leg yield, they can do a haunches in. They've probably been exposed to a half pass. Simple lead changes are indeed 100%. That's dropping to the trot, 1 or 2 strides, and then picking up the new lead at the canter or the lope. They've probably been exposed to flying lead changes, going from the left lead at the lope right to the right lead at the lope. You've roped off of them, so you've doctored yearlings outside. You've branded calves on them. You probably ride around the flag, maybe roped horses on them if you're into that kind of thing. Starting colts, that kind of stuff. They've been exposed to about everything in this day and age a person could expose a horse to, and now you're always going to get the obscure question, well, I'm an elk hunter, can you shoot off of them? Well, you can always do it at least one time, So they've probably been hobbled.
Try.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Depends on how good at shooting a rifle you are, I suppose. But they're hobble broke, and by my standards for hobble breaking is I put the hobbles on when they're educated to them up on their cannon bones, and that horse would stand right there and get thirsty and hungry without going anywhere. A lot of guys think that hobble broke is one that just wears the hobbles and they roam around and graze and that kind of thing. Well, there's a lot of places that I go that there might not be a fence for 20 miles. And if you get off to do something and hobble your horse and he goes off grazing with the hobbles, you might be a couple of days finding him, So when I put the hobbles on, I want him to stay right there, literally. So they're broke to that. Ray Hunt used to tell them you have to think about exposing them to the unthinkable. Well, you wouldn't live long enough to expose them to everything like that, of course. But, you try to get them exposure to things that would scare them, things that would, frighten them, whatever it might be. But then they're gentle about all that stuff as well and whatever. So by the time you get into the hackamore, it's just refining those upper level movements, which would be a half pass, the walk canter, the canter walk, the flying lead changes like I spoke of earlier, those kinds of things. And for the most part, oddly enough, any working cowboy, even if they didn't know it or weren't per se a student of this style of horsemanship or whatever, they get their horses doing a lot of those maneuvers just because of the nature of their work. I mean, if you ride into a branding trap and you need to move your horse over to the right 4 feet, but you can't go forward because there's a group of calves in front of you, you're either going to side pass, half pass, or leg yield. Well, some of those guys maybe don't know the terminology, but they can get their horse to do the movements. So, in the nature of the cowboy world, doing the movements, a lot of it comes just because of the nature of the job. This style of horsemanship is certainly akin to Grand Prix dressage, and historically, Grand Prix dressage was used in warfare. If you weren't riding a Grand Prix horse, you probably got your head lopped off by somebody else's sword. Well, they don't let us do that today anymore, but now we're swinging a rope instead of operating a sword. So, learning those movements is indeed a benefit. Now, a lot of folks, particularly that maybe come to my clinics or something like that, they would say, well, I don't need all that fancy stuff. I'm just a trail rider. Well, my answer typically would be, well, let's say you're going down the trail and it's very narrow and you have a cliff on one side that goes down 300 feet, and then you have a rock wall on the other side, but you come to the trail and there's a great big rock there, you might have to back your horse up 4 or 5 lengths of his body to find a place to turn around. Well, maybe you got to make a little bit of an arc in that backup, you know? You've got to jump a log going across the trail. There's a bazillion things that could come up where a person would need a lot of those movements unknowingly to them, calling them movements, I suppose, you know. So without a doubt, it's very beneficial to every aspect of the equestrian world.
So you talk about being hobble broke. What many people mean by hobble broke, maybe myself included, is when I put the hobbles on, he doesn't flip over on his back and break the tree on my saddle.
Well, hopefully not. Yeah, exactly. Now, unfortunately, there is always that possibility, but yeah.
Right.
So,
but I understand. I appreciate your definition, and it is objectively better.
Yeah. Well, now don't get me wrong. There's a lot of prep work that goes into that before I would
Right.
do that. You know, I'm roping them by a hind foot and stopping them from traveling forward. I'm roping them by a front foot and leading them forward on purpose. And when I say roping them, I shouldn't say that the horse is moving. I'm throwing a loop and catching that single leg out of the air. That horse is gentle enough. I can walk up to him, pick up his foot, put the rope around the pastern, and, have it roped. So I've done all that, all 4 feet. I lead them by their front feet, get them stopping by a hind foot. And then I would typically probably put a third leg hobble on them and tie that third leg hobble up to the front hobbles. Now, at that stage, those front hobbles are plumb down on the pasterns. They're not up on the cannon bones. Because if he did struggle, and he's probably going to, I don't want him to injure those tendons that are on the backside of the cannon bones. But once they learn to stand with 3 legs hobbled, then I typically pull that third leg hobble off and then move the hobbles up onto the cannon bone. So, yeah. So there's certainly a process to get them that far, but that's my end goal. I don't want them to travel.
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Create Coaches. Hey, are you ready to turn your knowledge and skills into a new profession? Or are you already teaching but would like to beef up your technical knowledge of healthy agroecological systems? Create Coaches is Nicole Masters' 30-week training designed to train and empower consultants and coaches in the theory, principles, and practices behind healthy agroecological systems. Applications for the 2026 Create course open May 1st. For more information, check out www.integritysoils.com. So I appreciate the arc of the process. And I think if I was hearing correctly, you described a 5-year process that's ending around 7 years. And then actually it never really ends. They're never really finished. They're always improving. But to get to straight up in the bridle, about 7 years old, starting from a little, spring of their 2-year-old year. So
2-year-old year,
we're talking a 5-year process, 7-year-old horse. And I understand myself and know that I don't probably have time for that.
Right.
As much as I'd love to have a finished bridle horse.
Yeah. And the other part is, okay, so let's say, let's be honest with you, most of the folks that are riding in a horsemanship clinic nowadays are middle-aged women that have been successful to some extent financially, or that at least they're involved in that kind of a relationship, and their kids are raised, and they do have time, okay? But they don't have access to working cattle. They don't have access to roping cattle. They only have one horse to ride, so they don't have a bunch of colts to be flagging around the arena on that horse. They don't get the opportunity to go on a 4-hour weekend trail ride, whatever it is. So to expose that horse to those kinds of things, those folks are going to be a little bit behind, So to have a real bridle horse in the sense that I'm talking about, yeah, you got to be able to do those kinds of things. Now, could you use your imagination and get them exposed to something similar to that? Well, certainly. You could be dragging a log with them. You could work a cutting horse flag with them. You know, surely they have other friends that have horses. Those, you could chase each other around with a flag, that kind of thing, So there is a way to synthesize, I guess, for lack of a better way to do it, the real thing. But, where I come from and the teachers that I had and that kind of stuff, they all had that kind of exposure, or that availability of working cattle and roping colts and that kind of thing. So that's how those horses got educated, and historically, of course, that was how it was as well, because you go out on those big ranchos in Alta California, back in the years of the missions, you might have 5 or 10,000 head of cattle that you were working from daylight till dark, you know, so there was always that part of it,
Right.
So
And those jobs do still exist. They are few and far between, but they do still exist, and there would be
certainly,
opportunities for people in those contexts to work on these things and get to riding a finished bridle horse that is
without a doubt,
practically
yep,
used on a ranch day in and day out, right?
you bet, yeah, without a doubt, yep, yep. So
Fun.
there's lots of places around that you can take your own horse and do their cattle work, I mean, the working cow guest ranch type of thing, you know. Um, so if a person has the financial wherewithal, they could definitely make a bridle horse, even if they weren't a quote unquote horse trainer, so to speak, or a working cowboy, you know, without a doubt.
Right.
So, yep.
Right. But practically speaking, many people aren't in those scenarios. And so what I'd like to do now is take a turn and talk about how do we just get the most out of the horses we do have. And we can talk about some of the different equipment that's out there from a bits perspective. Is there a reason to ride a horse in anything but a snaffle bit or a hackmore, in your opinion?
Well, biomechanically speaking, if you're interested in tasting the finer points of horsemanship and being able to achieve the level of movements or the level of operating your horse's feet in a real refined way, doing your best to seek out educating your horse enough to call him a bridle horse would definitely be your venture. But there's certainly nothing wrong with having a really nice snaffle bit horse, or a really nice hackamore horse. You know, like we've already talked about, a lot of folks don't have the availability to expose their horse to everything that horse needs to be a legitimate bridle horse in the California style sense of it. But seldom, doing the clinic thing, seldom do I see a really nice snaffle bit horse, you know, a snaffle bit horse that is very light to the hand, that can get soft in the reins and be able to lope out of its tracks, be able to stop and turn around and then lope a little bit of a circle and do a really nice flying lead change across the middle, or do a flying lead change down the long side of the arena, for example, you know. But you could get your snaffle bit horse to do those things. Wouldn't be anything wrong with it at all, you know. But if a person's interested in really refining the movements and refining the fact that an onlooker can't really tell what you're doing with your seat, hands, or legs to get that horse to operate, that's where you'll be more pursuing the two rein and the bridle and that kind of thing. Because the bridle, it, in the true California sense of it, those reins are supposed to operate in probably about an 8 or a 9-inch box over top of your saddle horn. Whether you're galloping him and getting to do a slide and stop, you're turning him over his hocks, you're just loping on a loose rein, whatever it might be. Whereas in a snaffle bit, and certainly in the earlier stages of the hackamore riding, your hands are 18, 20 inches apart. You got your right hand on the right rein, your left hand on the left rein, and people can easily see that yes, you tip the horse's nose to the right, so he turns over his hocks to the right. But folks might be able to distinguish that if you're riding a real bridle horse. So those are kind of some of the subtle differences, but really there is no crime, no shame in making a really nice snaffle bit or hackamore horse, without a doubt. So
Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Gray's Magazine. If you enjoy this podcast, you'll probably enjoy Gray's Magazine. It's all about grazing, management, mindset, and learning from other producers doing the work. It's written by grazers for grazers, and it's been around for 25 years. It's not fluff. It's practical stuff you can actually use. They're offering Working Cows listeners $10 off an annual subscription. Go to grazonline.com and use code WORKINGCOWS to get it. But then at the same time, what I hear you saying is a lot of the work that you're going to do to make them a nice snaffle bit horse or a hackamore horse is going to kind of get you up to that point of putting them into a spade bit.
Without a doubt. You bet. Yeah. Yep.
Right.
In this day and age, you could get a rather inexpensive California style bridle, a port bridle, a spade bit, a half breed bit, and all the other different mouthpieces that come with them, for $400 or $500. Or you could get a silver mounted bit, from a custom bit maker from $2,500 on up. But a lot of folks don't want to spend that kind of money on horse gear, So you can get a good quality snaffle bit for $200. So, there is that. And unfortunately, now it does cost a little bit of money to get your horse educated and in the proper gear and blah blah blah, I suppose, But historically, those guys are all making their own gear, I mean, they were all braiding rawhide. They had a friend that was twisting hair because he knew how to do it, and he got a hair rope and all that kind of stuff. But most of the time nowadays, you're going to purchase that equipment, and the quality of gear is definitely related to the price of it. Typically the more expensive it is, the better quality it has, without a doubt. But the nice thing about this stuff, whether it be a saddle or a bridle or a hair rope or whatever, if you take care of it, you're going to be able to give it to your grandkids, and it still has a lot of use and life to it. So it's worth it,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
how would you say, or what would you say, what's the process? I mean, aside from attending one of your schools, or on top of, in addition to attending one of your schools, maybe better said, to getting the most out of the ranch horse that is getting used, more frequently in the spring and the fall, maybe less frequently in the heart of the summer and in the dead of winter. What are how would you think about making that experience the best it can be?
Well, there's, in this day and age, everybody's in a hurry and things happen instantaneously and all that kind of stuff. But if you really think about it, how much time does a person spend on social media nowadays? Of any given discipline, talent, job, employment, whatever it is, let's call it 2 hours a day, just on a theoretical average. Well, any given day, you could take an hour of that and go spend with your horse, So, okay, well, I live in the North Country. I don't have an indoor barn, and the snow is 3 feet deep, and it's 20 degrees outside. I don't want to go out and ride around, Well, that's understandable. But you could go out, when you're feeding and take 10 minutes and work him on the end of the halter rope, if you had a mind to, you know, instead of, sitting in the house when it is 90 degrees in the summertime in the air conditioning. Get up a little earlier in the morning, go outside while it's cool, put a little ride on your horse in the heat of the summer, So that kind of stuff. Most people nowadays literally don't physically ride enough. And for the most part, unless you're definitely a working cowboy, or or do all of your cow work on your ranch exclusively with horses, you probably don't ride enough, you know. I mean, you think about it, 100 years ago, that was our mode of transportation. Whether it was just going to the
Right.
mailbox or going to town, you had to catch and saddle a horse. Well, now it's strictly, on a greatest average, recreational. Whether you're going to go competitively show that horse in any discipline, or you're just going to go down the, take him to the national forest and take a trail ride on the weekend, or, go elk hunting with him in the fall, or whatever it might be. But,
Or go to the neighbor's branding. It's a lot of fun.
well, without a doubt. Yeah. But, you're going to spend a month, like you say, in the spring riding him 4 or 5 days a week because you got a lot of things going on and that kind of stuff. Or, you about that same amount of time in the fall because you're gathering, shipping, weaning, all that kind of stuff, whatever. But there's a lot of opportunity to work with your horse. But in this day and age, we don't take that opportunity to do so because of all the other things, Well, I have to take the kids to soccer, and I have to mow the lawn, I have to get groceries, and I have to check my social media, and then I have to call my friend, and, well, then I have to, I don't know, whatever it is, So it's kind of funny. I ride horses for the public for a living at home and do the clinic thing because I enjoy helping people and that kind of stuff. And people ask me all the time, well, what do you do for fun? Or what do you do for your vacation? I ride horses. I don't vacation, I mean, so I ride a lot. But most folks don't take that opportunity. And some of them, I'll be honest with you, some of them don't have that opportunity because they are busy. They have kids, they have a real job. They're living in a place where they have to board their horse 20 miles away. And because of the place they're at, it takes them 2 hours to get there because the traffic is so thick. So it's not convenient to go ride every day, and that's understandable. I mean, I get that. So
let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, the South Dakota Grassland Coalition.
Learn how to increase your stocking rates, extend your grazing season, increase plant diversity, retain moisture in your soil, spend less time and money on weed control, and much more at one of the South Dakota Grassland Coalition's grazing schools. During this 3-day intensive program, area producers, along with presenters from state and local agencies, combine hands-on activities in the field with classroom-style presentations to walk you through the steps necessary to create a grazing plan that suits your unique operation. Reserve your spot at one of the grazing schools today at sdgrass.org.
What I hear you saying is groundwork and riding. Those are the ways to get the most out of your ranch horse. Those are the ways to have that experience be the best that it can be. More regular groundwork, more regular riding.
yeah.
What is the content? Let's just start with the groundwork. What's the content of the groundwork? What are some of the things that we want to work on?
Well, having that horse be respectful on the end of the lead rope. First and foremost, not crowding you. Being a leader of a horse on the end of a lead rope means you are supposed to move the horse's feet. The horse is not supposed to move your feet. Okay. Be able to have that horse go around you in a circle and be truly bent in the direction of the circle. I tell folks all the time that horse should be shaped like a banana going around your circle, because people can relate to that. Have that horse be mentally connected to you, even if you got 6 or 8 feet away and you weren't pulling on the lead rope. Have his mind keep track of you. So if you walked a circle around him to the right, he would bend his head and neck to the right, consequently moving his feet to his left in an effort to stay lined up, so to speak. Be able to have that horse stop when you stop when you're leading him. Be able to have that horse actually lead up when you take off to go across the corral, the feed yard, the yard, whatever it is. Those kinds of things. Get him used to things that might be scary, i.e. using a flag, pretty common horsemanship flags nowadays, and that kind of stuff. But a lot of folks maybe don't understand or appreciate the use of that flag. It's not supposed to be like a whip, you know. You're supposed to get that horse respectful of it, i.e., be able to touch him all over with the flag material as well as the tip of the flag rod, maybe. But then if you presented that flag in a way that would cause that horse to move his feet, he should just willingly move his feet. You shouldn't have to wave that flag up and down like you were having some kind of seizure or a fit in an effort to get that horse to move. So getting them used to those kinds of things, a lot of people say, well, I'm no cowboy, so I don't need to get my horse used to working with a rope. Yeah, but you're going to ride him outside. You well know, as I do, that there's wire from fences buried all over the United States of America in tall grass, you know. Um, Unfortunately, you're probably going to give him a bath with a garden hose maybe sometime, you know. If you're really that way, you're probably going to give him a haircut of some kind with an electric pair of clippers that has an extension cord tied to it, you know. So getting him used to a rope around his legs and that kind of thing is hugely beneficial. You don't have to be a cowboy to get him used to a rope, you know. So those kinds of things, without really diving into the mechanics, the groundwork, and that kind of stuff, those are some of the groundwork things that I would really stress, you know, getting them respectful on the end of the lead rope. So,
Yep. No, I appreciate that. And then as far as riding, some of the things that you would pay attention to, think about, work on, be intentional about if you're gonna go out and say, rather than spending 2 hours on social media, I'm gonna be 1 hour today and I'll go out and spend an hour with my horse.
right,
What are
right.
some of the things you'd work on?
I would make sure that I would be able to walk, trot, and lope that horse relatively accurately, certainly first on a loose rein, and then maybe work at getting him on the bit, or what we call a soft feel, and be able to ride him accurately at the walk, trot, and lope on the bit or in that soft feel. Being able to have that horse just stand still with you sitting on him, that's a big thing. You know, a lot of folks, because so many of us are riding in an arena or a pasture, a round pen, whatever it might be, they think as soon as they get in there, or as soon as they get out there, they got to be stirring up the dust and making that horse do whatever it is they're doing, and go here, go there, turn around, stop, do this, whatever. Well, there's a huge benefit in, doing your groundwork, getting him ready, put a little ride on him, and then just go sit somewhere in the arena or somewhere in the pasture and have that horse put his head down, cock a hind leg, and theoretically go to sleep, you know, while you're sitting on him, you know, because that's a big thing. That's like getting kids in school to just sit still and be quiet and listen. You know, a teacher's always striving for that to happen, you know. So those kinds of things. Um, you know, getting him respectful off your legs without having to do so much, you know, kicking him harder than you would prefer to, or thinking, man, he's kind of dull to my leg today. I think I'm going to go get a spur. And you go get your spurs on and you still kick him as hard as you did before. And then he bucks you off for it. Well, then he's a dirty son of a gun. And if the horse could talk, he'd say, man, you had them spurs on, but you didn't adjust how much you kicked me. And there was quite a bit more on the end of your boot there than just your heel. So I thought I was getting punished, and I thought I needed to protect myself. So, be a little bit more thoughtful about your horse, that kind of thing. And as far as the bit or the headgear or whatever, I'm pretty old school, and I'm pretty true to my teachers. And a lesser educated horse or a young horse, the best thing that you could ride him with would be a snaffle bit, a single jointed 3/8 in diameter mouthpiece, egg butt, O-ring, D-ring, whatever, you know. Um, And then when he gets educated enough, move to a hackamore. And for me, that would be a California style hackamore, not a mechanical hackamore, not a cable core, rawhide covered noseband, nothing like that. You know, because there's so many folks out there that say, well, this is a transitional bit between the snaffle and the hackamore, and then this is a transitional bit between the transitional bit, and this will get your horse's head down, and this will get you a better stop, and all that kind of stuff. Well, where I come from, that little piece right there at the end of your wrist out to your fingertips, that's what gets your horse stopping better. Not only that, but your seat and legs. It has nothing to do with what's in the horse's mouth. So, because I saw Ray Hunt and Buck Branham and both ride their horses around with a rope around their neck and still turn them around fast enough to spin your hat off your head and still do a slide and stop with them. So I know it can be done. So I have started a horse or two in the hackamore, which was what was traditionally used, because they didn't have snaffle bits back in those days. But nowadays it's thought of socially acceptable to start a young horse in a snaffle bit and then move to the hackamore and whatever, if you're adhering to this style of horsemanship. So I'm pretty stickler about that. So,
Yep. And so lesser educated horses in a snaffle bit or young horses, and then more educated horses if you're not going to go all the way to the spade, to the bridle setup. More educated horses in a hackamore. Is it that simple to you?
well, I suppose so. Yeah. But if you're, for me, I guess if you were going to make the effort to get you a nice hackamore, why not go ahead and go all in and get you a 2-rein outfit and whatever, because you can use the same bridle bit on a 2-rein that you do when you're straight up in the bridle. So you don't have to get multiple bridles. You could have one snaffle bit rig, one hackamore rig, one pencil boselle with the pencil hair on it, which is called a 2-rein hackamore, and then one bridle bit setup, and you'd be set for life on anything that you probably ride. Now, I will say there is one caveat for me, because of how I learned this stuff from my teachers. I would probably start my 2-rein horse in a half-breed mouthpiece, California style bit, because you can start using those bridle reins a little sooner in the horse's education. And there's nothing wrong with riding a straight-up finished bridle horse in a half-breed mouthpiece. Historically, traditionally, though, you would end up moving him into a spade bit mouthpiece. But there's nobody's probably going to write you a ticket or take your birthday away if you only had a half-breed mouthpiece bridle. So,
They just look at you like they look at the people at the cowboy church that show up with their spurs on upside down.
Yeah, that would be not fashionable. Right. Well, yeah.
No. Anyways, I appreciate that. I do think that is the way to go, and it is something that's always intrigued me for sure. A couple of things I wanted to pick up here from things that you've mentioned on the loose rein, when you're talking about walking or trotting or loping on a loose rein. Do people usually have tension in the rein because the horse is cheating them, wanting to fade left or right, or what are they trying to fix when they are not moving on a loose rein?
Well, typically there's two things going on there. And I have found, with my experience, more often than not, they're a little bit more choked up on the reins, thinking they're on a loose rein because they're scared and they're hanging on, quite frankly. The second reason that they wouldn't genuinely be on a loose rein is because they've never actually let that horse go on a loose rein, and they think they need to be short enough on the reins that if the horse got to going too fast, they could get him slowed down to some extent in a shorter amount of time, But for me, now I have a lot of experience in that kind of stuff, but that first ride in the snaffle bit, I'm probably still in the round pen on a colt, okay? But that first ride, probably the first 3 or 4 rides, every time I lope that horse, you could throw a cowboy hat underneath my horse's throat latch and not hit those reins on my snaffle bit rig. That's a loose rein to me. Well, in a round pen, where's he going to go, first and foremost? And if he goes maybe faster than you're riding at that stage of the horse's education, it's okay because you're going to want him to go sometime. So you've got to make sure that that horse knows that he's allowed to move out that fast, So that's probably the second biggest thing I see is that people are scared to have that horse go maybe faster than they're riding because of prior incidences, maybe with that horse or with another horse they have or have ridden or something like that. So they're a little bit scared, So they're hanging on. That's how it is,
Yep. For sure. And then another thing you mentioned earlier is standing still, working on getting a horse to stand still. What do you do when a horse isn't wanting to stand still? Is it just get their feet moving and kind of pressure and release? Is that the move, or how do you approach that?
Well, typically I would approach working on that standing still thing after the horse has made a big effort at maybe doing a movement or trotting around for a while or loping around for a while or whatever. Not because he's tired and wants to stand still, but I'm telling him, look, you put out a big effort and it was all satisfactory for your education level. Now is your time to chill. Just hang out. Just be a horse, but have me with you. Still wearing the saddle, still have a chunk of iron in your mouth, all that kind of stuff. So that would be where I would take that opportunity. But let's say I'm on a really green horse and he's like, man, I just can't sit still. I got to be moving my feet because I'm not sure. Well, I might do something as simple as just prior to him wanting to move, I might get a soft feel. I might tip his nose right or left. I might back him up a step or two, something like that. But it takes a little bit of feel and timing on the rider's part to be that attuned to what may be coming up. So let's say in a scenario where, the horse got ahead of the rider and now the horse is moving. Well, then the rider needs to say, hey, stop, let's turn, let's back up, let's turn you around over your hocks a time or two, right or left, whatever it might be. And then I'll give you the chance to sit still again, So preferably the rider would get to feeling back to the horse and know mentally about how long that horse could stand still before it thought it had to go. And just prior to that horse wanting to leave, that guy would check back in with that horse. Well, in a lot of cases, that might be just picking up on the reins and getting him to put his chin down and in. Maybe take my right leg and move it back a little bit and have him step his hindquarters over to the left, something like that. But there again, it takes a little bit of forethought and some experience to be able to have that kind of timing, So that's how I would approach that, though. Getting that horse to just take a cigarette break, so to speak. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I appreciate that. One of the things that as I was getting ready for this interview, watching some content online, I heard you say something that really struck me. And you said, next time you watch a Western movie, pay attention when they go to turn their horse or leave, if the horse turns his head and follows with his body, or if he points his pole and falls in the direction that the guy wants him to go.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, man, how many times have I seen that? Even just standing around the branding pen and it's time to go gather the herd, it's just
exactly.
And even in my own horse too. So, I want to give you the opportunity to pontificate on that for a while.
Well, as far as the movie thing goes, Clay, those horses probably weren't very finessed, if that's a word. And by that, I mean, when the rider took a hold of the reins, did that horse put his chin down and in and get bridled up and look like a swan, the classic swan neck that we see in so many drawings and that kind of thing. That horse was educated to the point where when you pulled back on the reins, he stopped. When you kicked him in the guts, he went forward. When you pulled his head to the right, he either fell to the right or he went off to the right. Now, a lot of times those horses are falling to the right to go with their nose and neck tipped to the left, primarily because they're trying to adjust their position of their head to accommodate getting equal pressure on that grazing bit that was in their mouth. Okay. So now it kind of gets into biomechanics, and I don't want to get off in the weeds here, but imagine if you took a hold of two reins on a grazing style bit. That's a stiff shank bit with a stiff mouthpiece. If you pull on the right rein and the left rein is pulling equal amount of pressure on the left side of the horse's neck, that horse has to turn his head and or lift his head and neck to a position to where he feels equal amount of tension on both sides of his mouth. Okay. That's why in the classic Western, you see John Wayne rip that horse's head off to the right to go to the right. And that horse slings his head and neck in the air and sticks his nose up and to the left. Okay. So, and don't get me wrong, John Wayne is my hero without a doubt, but he didn't have any horsemanship skills whatsoever. So, but, like in a branding pen for ourselves, and in this day and age, if you're out, at the neighbors gathering cattle and that kind of stuff, the same is true for me. If I'm riding a snaffle bit horse and I want to go off to the right, I'm going to open my right leg and my right rein. My left hand may or may not take the slack out of the left rein, but my left hand's not going to come over top of his neck, because I want him to associate that when the right side of your body is open and the left side of your body essentially is closed, you should move off to the right, And then depending upon that horse's level of education will dictate whether he leaves with his chin down and in, i.e. being on a soft heel or what we call bridled up, or if he just moves off with his head and neck in a natural position. So, but a lot of folks aren't aware of the fact that your legs are just as important as your hands, if not more so. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and first got around Ray Hunt a handful of times, I used to dread the point in the clinics where he'd say, "All right, let's walk a serpentine with him with just your legs." He'd say, put your reins over your saddle horn or over your horse's neck and just operate them with your legs. And I was like, oh, I hate this, because I wasn't any good at it, of course, So it took me a long time to understand that. But after making a few bridle horses years later, and honestly, I think about it every time I'm working on making a bridle horse. If you don't get that horse operating at the walk and the trot with just your legs exclusively, you're going to run into some problems by the time you start riding him in a bridle bit. So it's extremely important to get that horse operating off your legs. So,
yeah. Very good. I appreciate your time today. I want to finish up by asking this one last question, and that is this. So I'm asking pretty much all these questions to satisfy my own curiosity. So I won't pretend that I'm not this person that I am talking about. Say somebody is listening to this today and they're convinced, says, okay, I've been using curb bits and collection bits and correction bits and every other bit in the world. And I'm convinced Kip's right, this is the way to go. Where do they start? So I've got a 13, 14, 15-year-old horse, and I've got a 4-year-old horse. Where do I start with that older horse? What should I do? Just keep doing what I'm doing? Or should I try to, bring him along with some of these other pieces of equipment? Do I slap a spade bit in his mouth first thing, or do I start with something else? How do you think about those things?
Well, as far as kind of getting either one of those horses more educated in this style of horsemanship, I would first put the snaffle bit on your older horse and do some groundwork, and if you didn't have a snaffle bit with a McCarty on it, which has the lead rope as well, you could surely do it in a halter. But I'd do some groundwork and get that horse bending laterally, being able to get him to go on a feel to where you don't have to use your flag or the tail of your rope to get him to go around you in a circle. And then get on him, at that age and that experience level on the horse, he's probably gentle enough. He's not going to buck you off if you make a mistake. He's not going to run off with you, all that kind of stuff. So you should experiment with doing these movements on that older horse with a snaffle bit. And then that way you could apply all those things to your younger horse where, if you did end up making a mistake or whatever, because of that horse's lack of experience on that younger horse, you might get in a jam. But practice on your older horse, because they're going to be a little bit more forgiving and that kind of thing. And then apply those things to that young horse just the same. So, and, quite honestly, I've told this to a lot of people, if you've got an older horse that's doing all the things you want it to do, as far as movements go, as far as how much effort you have to put out to get that horse to operate, the headgear that you're using on that horse is probably fine for that horse. But your younger horse, if you have that opportunity to have a younger horse and that kind of stuff, I really encourage people, look, man, get you a snaffle bit, kind of get on the deal here and at least follow this style of horsemanship. Most folks that come to my clinics, as well as honestly, I would think my teacher would say the same thing. Most folks that come to the clinics nowadays are looking to just be able to get along better with their horse and have a safe ride from here to there. They may or may not go to Brandon once a year, once a lifetime. They spend their 2 hours on the weekend riding around an arena. They take an hour-long trail ride and think they've really went somewhere, whatever it is. They just want to be safe. Well, I've heard Buck say it a million times. People would always comment, well, I want my horse to operate like yours. And Buck's pat answer is, well, you have to do what I do. That means the groundwork. That means riding as much as you can, swinging a rope on them, riding them with a flag, all that kind of stuff, So, and the odd thing about it is, Clay, is this style of horsemanship works on any equitation discipline horse there is. And it even works on mules and Appaloosas. So, So,
Just in case you were wondering if they fall into the court in those categories, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So
very good. Well, yeah, Kip, I really appreciate your time today. You've got schools in Illinois in May and June. You've got schools in Michigan, Ohio, and South Dakota, and Montana, all the way into July in Montana, Utah, California in the later end of the year. Talk to me a little bit about those and kind of where people might say, hey, this is where I fit. This is the school I should be at.
Well, most of my clinics are for the most part either what I call a fundamental class, which is a groundwork class, and then we ride those horses towards the end of the class period. Relatively designed for a horse that needs a little bit of extra preparation on the lead rope before you were getting on, or the person that's interested in developing better skills doing the groundwork. And then the other class would be the horsemanship class, just general maneuvers, lower level maneuvers and that kind of thing. I am doing a colt starting this year in Conrad, Montana, so those horses will be, 2 and 3 year old, never ridden horses and that kind of stuff. But chances are most people, if they haven't been around this style of horsemanship, they're going to benefit from being in the morning class, typically the foundation or the fundamental class, I call it, because that's going to give them the benefit of both worlds. You're going to get to learn and experience the groundwork as well as being able to get some help riding that horse. So, and as far as getting a hold, or, if they're interested in riding with me, or if they're in that kind of country or wherever it is, my website is kfhorses.com. I got a clinic schedule on there, and you can get a hold of any of those clinic sponsors and get signed up or whatever. So, and spectators are welcome at all of them. So, yep.
Very good. Kip, thank you
You
for
bet.
your time today.
No problem. Thanks, Clay. Take care.
Very good stuff there with Kip. Really appreciate him taking the time to share that process and just the ways that we can continue to make investments in that relationship, and rather than spending time doom scrolling or whatever we're doing instead of that. And appreciate that. That's a helpful way to look at it. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, we're going to talk to Morgan Mickle. Morgan has a great YouTube channel where he features his sheep operation, his large-scale sheep operation in Utah and I think even other states that they cross over into. But very, very interesting conversation with him about the business of running sheep, and looking forward to sharing that with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.